How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to talk about rebuilding trust after an escape. This is going to be relevant because right now we did have 10 inmates that escaped out of New Orleans. So this topic right now is needed because I think a lot of people want to know what happens after an escape. How does the facility try to rebuild? How do we learn from the errors of our past? And I think it's going to be a good dialogue. And just a quick summary of the incident. On May 16, 2025, 10 inmates escaped from the Orleans Justice Center in New Orleans. The escape went undetected for over 7 hours, with the public not being notified until later that morning. The inmates exploited facility vulnerabilities, including faulty infrastructure and lapses in supervision. A maintenance worker, Sterling Williams, was arrested for allegedly assisting the escape by turning off water to a cell, facilitating the removal of a sink toilet unit, and allowing access to a wall cavity. At this time, 3 jail employees were suspended pending investigation. And as of now, 5 escapees have been recaptured while 5 remain at large. Sheriff Susan Hudson has faced criticism over the incident and has suspended her re-election campaign to focus on restoring public trust. So we're going to build into 7 areas of that effort to rebuild. But before we go into that, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work at a local county probation department and a local county jail where I am a case manager. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, and Keepers of Chaos with a K on Facebook is dedicated to the brave men and women of correctional law enforcement, as well as all other people who work in corrections, whether you're a teacher, a doctor, medical staff, whatever, just trying to, help things make a little bit easier, to give some mentorship, some insight, some training, knowledge, and content, as it were.
All right. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to rebuilding trust after an escape is public trust and transparency. So authorities delayed notifying the public for over 7 hours after the escape, leading to criticism and eroding public trust. So, I mean, again, they didn't discover the escape till 7 hours, and they didn't let the public know until hours after that. So basically, it's about being transparent, fast, own the failure, control the message, and balance truth with public safety to avoid panic and restore confidence. So the investigative insight here is the delay in communication revealed the lack of crisis protocol and unclear chains of command for public notification. So, Russ, when a facility experiences an escape, what does effective public messaging look like in those first 24 hours, and what mistakes should be avoided?
So, in the initial part where the escape is first discovered or whatever, in order not to break trust with the public, they should have immediately been out there. They should have had things ready to go with regards to these guys' mugshots, where they were from, their direction of travel, and a few things like that, in order that the public could actually help with the reapprehension. Seeing that not happen is just one of those things that's going to make it that much more difficult later on down the line in order to reestablish that trust. I think that they're at a point now that they really have to start focusing, number one, of course, on the reapprehension, but number two, what is it going to look like, the report that they're going to have to generate as to how all of this happened, and whether it's going to be, some giant CYA kind of operation, or whether it's going to do things that's actually going to put the facility back on the straight and narrow, headed back towards safety and security. I think right at this point here, it does not look good from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, and guys, with the use of cameras right now, obviously there is going to be a request for videos. People want to see more, and they want to see it quick because they believe that the access to the videos are immediate. And sometimes the public may not realize that there's investigations, and sometimes you don't want to release those videos out to the public right away because there could be a due process violation. But in this case here, the video was put out as quick as they could. But with that said, I think for me, I want leadership that takes ownership of the problem. I'm not saying this is the case everywhere, but when you have people that are into politics, sometimes they're more focused on tomorrow. So the first thing they worry about is their image and their vanity, and they'll be very quick to push down a systematic concern as an individualized error or individualized negligence, when in this case here, when you have an escape of 10 individuals, the escape of one is bad, let alone 10. But when you get the escape of 10 individuals, that's not a one-person negligence. That is a systematic concern that requires ownership at every level. Because if I'm the public and I'm looking to build faith in the system again, then I know at this point here, the system is what's going to have to be fixed. So I expect ownership for my people in those positions, because sometimes I think the biggest concern we get is when there's a lack of transparency or a delay in transparency. Sometimes the public may think that the person in charge is just trying to make the picture look a little bit prettier. And what I mean by look a little bit prettier is the CYA that Russ mentioned before, the cover your own ass, where that's not what the public wants. The public wants immediate accountability. So we know that if we're going to go ahead and fix a concern, we know we're getting to the root of the problem. And in this case here, it's systematic. And in this case here, you have to look at leadership and then work its way down. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've seen, initially from the beginning here. One of my concerns on this, and something that, people out there should watch for, is the way they treat the amount of time that elapsed between when the escape happened and when it was discovered. The amount of time that elapsed certainly took place when they actually had to have some kind of counts going on. You just don't let your entire facility go for that many hours without a count going on. And so I would be looking to see whether or not the people in charge are going to try and push down all of that accountability onto whoever was supposed to be in charge of those counts, be it the officers that were counting, or be it control, who was supposed to know how many inmates that they had in any given location. So that would be a concern of mine. There's certainly some accountability probably to be had there, but you can't just say that was the one single area where it happened. The idea with corrections is that we're supposed to have built-in firewalls and redundant systems that keep even things like botched counts from impinging on public safety. And so this went far beyond that. And, I'll be looking forward to the point where they actually produce a report on this, and as to whether or not that report is, tilted towards actually finding out what the truth is and providing solutions, or whether it's simply trying to assign blame to people who aren't at the top of the food chain, so to speak.
And Russ, that makes a lot of sense, because the redundancy, when you have multiple breaks at those layers, at those fail safes, you could assume at that point it's systematic. And usually it comes down to the culture that is tolerated, the culture that is permitted. And I want to mention one other thing when it comes to transparency, is that the reason why it's very important that we kind of showcase where those concerns are and how this escape happened is because the public then has to find trust in where we're going. So they're not going to find trust in where we're going unless it's rooted in where we have been and what went wrong. That is extremely important. You can't just say we're going to fix the matter without telling the public, well, what the hell went wrong? Because at that point here, it's just surface, and there's no foundation to that. So the next part I got is the internal agency, the confidence. So there's an update here. So 3 jail employees were suspended, and a maintenance worker was arrested for allegedly assisting the escape, impacting staff morale and raising concerns about internal accountability. So again, now this is about gaining confidence again in the people that do the job there. So support staff without excuse and failure, address fear and blame, and show up as a visible, steady leader to stabilize morale. This incident exposed both the potential breach in staff integrity and broader gaps in internal monitoring of civilian access and behavior. So, Russ, how can leadership help staff process an escape without feeding a culture of blame or discouragement?
I think that that this is going to rely a lot on what the internal review has to say. It's also going to rely almost exclusively on what that internal review produces. If this becomes just a CYA, none of the people inside that organization and facility are going to have any confidence in it. So once they get that, once they produce that, they're going to have to put out another part of that that's going to really address what those issues are. One of the things that I see right off the bat there is this individual that they arrested. I mean, what kind of background did they do on that person? Is that going to be addressed? Were there any telltale signs that staff, ignored or missed? I'm going to bet that there almost certainly was. And then beyond that, it seems to me like they really had an issue with the physical plant itself. Was no one addressing what was going on and where those security breaches could occur? Because that's something I would be looking at, especially, if we were having problems where we were, having to do major or even minor repairs, and what could happen with that plant in that condition. And, why did they not, have some more proactive approaches towards trying to stop that type of thing? I don't have any necessary, behind the scenes insight, but I know what I've seen in the past, and I have experience with how this sort of thing goes down.
Yeah, and guys, an escape, an inmate death. I mean, these are moments that are very embarrassing for a facility because this is where the trust is or has been established. So it's a violation when something like this happens. And the public is going to want immediate accountability. The public's going to want immediate accountability. And sometimes there's a finesse here, because if I was leadership, how do I still maintain confidence in my staff without making it seem like it's an excuse for what they've done? So, I mean, how do I build trust at the same time as I'm trying to build some level of accountability? And this really does take finesse, because in the end, there is staff that do their job, and again, maybe the resources just weren't in play. And at this point here, was that documented? Was staff operating with limited resources? I mean, it's just good to approach things objectively before we pass judgment, because here's the scary thing. Yes, 10 people escaped, and that has a tremendous amount of consequences for the public. We understand that. But having said that, we still need to be able to look back and say, hey, you know what happened here? Who's at fault? And is there anything that we can do to help make this better? Is there resources that they should have had that wasn't in play? And again, this is the part that's tough, because you're trying to rebuild confidence back into a facility, back into an agency that has gone through something like this. And it's just not easy to do. So if you're in leadership right now and you're trying to build a better bridge, remember, that better bridge isn't about you separating yourself from what happened, but rather, how do you get yourself more involved to bring out the good that's being done amongst the negativity? That's the extremely challenging part, Russ, right? To find that balance of promoting trust while at the same time establishing accountability.
Absolutely. And, there's several things that they should really be looking to do once they get to the point where they've reapprehended these individuals, at least. Getting an independent third party review in there. And I'm talking about someone not within the state or county, or I know it's parishes in Louisiana, I believe. Not people that are connected to those realms of the government, but a true independent third-party expert that can come in there and tear the whole thing apart and make recommendations and get it hammered out. And those people should also be partnered with some individuals, specifically from that community, because it's the community, it's the public there that's really been let down over this. Hopefully, we're going to get to a point where all of those people will be reapprehended, and the danger and jeopardy that currently exists because they're out there will no longer be a factor. But having that community partnership, in collaboration with some real independent third-party experts is going to be key towards rebuilding that trust. I think, if we just say, oh, okay, the sheriff's department or whatever, the Louisiana State Police or Highway Patrol or whatever they've got out there, I'm not sure, is going to come in and do it. I don't think the community is going to buy it. I don't think that the public is going to go, hey, wait a second, this is great. I think that they're going to say this has the potential for a cover-up. So I think that would be a good and smart move on their part. We're going to find out whether or not, they actually do something like this, or whether they're going to continue with the course that I've seen, which I think at this point does look like a CYA move. So, it's kind of one of those things. I'll be staying tuned. I'm sure that, we may be doing further videos on this depending on what happens.
Yeah, and guys, when we're at this point here, obviously this facility may have been holding on by a thread, and now the thread's been cut. So you figure more issues could arise eventually. That's why it's immediately necessary for us to maybe, as I think they're doing now, lock down that facility, try to kind of see what happened, what's the main causes, so you don't open up the facility too early. Hopefully the public doesn't pressure for that to happen if the facility hasn't been reopened at this point. And with that said, this again is a finesse. How do you build trust into the system when such a violation like this occurred? So again, it's not an easy thing, and I don't want people to look at this part and say, oh, they're coming up with excuses. No, because I think that we are human. We could be victim to circumstances. We could be victim to routine. We could be victim to accepting things that really shouldn't be accepted, like a facility that's not at its best. Okay, well, when did we start accepting that? Well, through the routine of it not being addressed. And again, I'm not making an excuse. I'm just saying routine eventually becomes what we accept. That becomes the norm. And that becomes the highest level of operational effectiveness. So again, 60 doors aren't working. That becomes the norm. And then eventually it's 65, then 70, or a whole unit, or we'll just put people, classify them the wrong way because I don't have room up here. We did it before. We'll do it again because nothing happened the first time. And eventually you got this norm of routine that is really just balanced with no safety in mind. And it is scary, guys. So again, I think one other question we should ask ourselves besides the blame is how are we, like Russ said, can be part of the solution to go forward, because people do get blinded by routine. And once you slip things by once, someone may be more motivated to do it again and again until there is a concern. So for here, and we'll get to it right now, it's a failure at the basic level. So operational review and accountability. So there was an update in New Orleans where the escape exposed systematic issues, including faulty infrastructure and inadequate supervision, prompting calls for comprehensive operational reviews, like Russ said, a third-person audit or a third-party audit. So you want to identify the root cause, be transparent, invite oversight, and ensure accountability is fair, not just optics. And there were operational lapses, not just staff conduct, and that this was central to how the inmates planned and executed their escape. Critical vulnerabilities were known but not addressed. And Russ, what's the right balance between holding people accountable and avoiding, it's kind of touched on this, but we'll revisit it again, holding people accountable and avoiding scapegoating during post-escape investigations?
That's the real question, because there's a propensity, maybe even a likelihood, for people to try and get out of or help people that are closer to the top of the chain to get out of the accountability that should be expressed and supposed there. So I think that that's why an independent third party is so key in that. I think that we should definitely, give the people, anyone that's implicated, a chance to give their view on it, to talk about what their experience was, and to get all of that on the record. I think it's also important for those who, ostensibly don't share any of the blame or any of the accountability, to get their viewpoints on the record too. There may be places where people had already pointed out, problems with the plant, problems with certain individuals, and get all of that on the record too. I don't think that they should get real busy in deciding who's to blame and then writing the report, which is a typical CYA type of move. There's a lot to this, and the more comprehensive and exhaustive it is, the better a product that they should be able to produce in that report. But time will tell.
Yeah, and guys, the reason why it's good to have that third party is because it does wake the facility up. Basically, the third party will come in and look at the policies first to see the policies that the jail is expected to operate under, and see if they're aligned with what's actually being done on the floor. I overheard something where the routine tours were 90 minutes, supervisors 3 times every 12 hours. I mean, I hope that's not the standard, but that's what they were discussing on a news interview not too long ago. That to me is unacceptable. Obviously, especially on third shift, it should be every half an hour within that 8-hour span, or however their shift works. You want multiple trips by a supervisor, and one of them should also be a cell to cell from one of the supervisors. But with that said, when something becomes a routine, one missed tour could become a routine for, not that bad. I missed one. Maybe I'll miss 2 because nothing happened, until eventually that becomes the culture. And the biggest concern we have that doesn't get exposed until it finally happens is basics. When you have a failure at the basics, unfortunately, it may not be so easily caught by leadership until there is that explosion, because you have to figure someone in leadership, every level down, they're pushing some level of insurance that the basics for each level prior is being handled. So again, if you have an officer failing at the basics, the sergeant or the next level up should be reinforcing it. And then the lieutenant should be reinforcing the sergeant, who reinforces the officer, the captain, all the way on up to the sheriff. So sometimes there could be some basic violations that are not being handled, like routine tours. Why aren't the routine tours being done? Why do we have it where inmates outside of their cell after midnight? I mean, to me, if they're not being watched by some officer that's doing a detail, those inmates should be locked in. They should be locked in way before 12. Some facilities do 10 at the weekend or holiday. They may do a little later, but there are a lot of things there that if I was looking at it from a supervisory perspective, the first thing I would be seeing is basic failures. And sometimes when you have people in these higher political positions that assume that, I'm going to be a sheriff and I'm going to run a county jail, they may not know what these basics are. They may not be recognizing these failures at that most immediate level. They may be seeing the video with a different filter than we ourselves right now, me and Russ are. And the reason why we get frustrated is because when you're going through this, you're going to see a lot of things that could have been prevented. And then now when you have an issue like this happens, the preventive measures become reactive measures. And it's like, well, that shouldn't have been reactive measures. That should have been preventive measures. And the biggest thing that I would say across the board is the no touring, the not discovering that anything happened till 8 hours later or 7 hours later, seeing an inmate on camera nonchalantly just pulling the door without even caring about being caught. Because here's the funny thing too, when we start getting caught up in that routine of complacency, and it does spread like wildfire, so it does become systematic. Every area that we're complacent in, those inmates are going to become more aggressive in. It's just how the scale balances. So when you put your feet up, they're putting their feet on the floor. And in this case here, These inmates noticed that there was a gap. They noticed how to play through routines that we or that staff may not even realize it was a problem because it's just a routine. You know what? I'm going to go eat at this time because the inmates should be locked in. Let me go eat. Let me go leave this unit without it being properly supervised. Well, what made you think you could do that? Well, because I did it yesterday and I did it the day before and nothing ever happened. Well, guess what? Each time you did that, the inmate was watching you. You know, so you're right, but they're watching you do it and they're waiting for the right moment until something does happen. And that's a big, oh shit moment. I will tell you one thing. When you fail at the basics, the end result is going to be the biggest, oh shit moment you'll ever have. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, chapter 1 of my book that I'm working on right now is called The Complacency of Routine. And, that routine happens on both sides of the equation. Our routine plays in to what they're able to, expose and leverage for themselves, or I should say exploit and leverage for themselves. And from our point of view, routine is just, our head is set. We have an expectation. And as long as that expectation is being met, we have blinders on.
I agree. And that pushes us to number 4. So I'm going to have, this is kind of what would be the next step. So once you notice that you're caught in a routine that's really affecting the culture. So now you have a systematic concern, a concern based on complacency. Now you have cultural repair. So in the New Orleans, you got the escape highlighted a culture of complacency with inmates exploiting known weaknesses such as faulty locks and unsupervised areas. So you have to confront complacency. You got to retrain, reset expectations, and remind staff of their role in safety and vigilance. The culture within the facility was described as routinized and reactive, with complacency spreading over time and staff struggling to enforce consistency. Russ, how do you recognize and address complacency that may have built up over time, and how do you reset the tone without creating fear?
There are so many different levels to that. That if I was just going to give one thing that I'd be able to point to is developing in your staff the ability to think critically and the ability, at their own level to act decisively with regard to that. I really try and teach people how to think, how to understand what's going on around them, and the ability to use tactical empathy to get inside the heads of the inmates to learn how they think and how they work towards manipulation and exploitation of both people and circumstance. So it's really, to me, a training issue. Being able to see things like that, being able to stay frosty, shift after shift, year after year is very difficult. But bringing these things to mind in people can really, help shatter that whole, complacency of routine and, complacency of the belief that, hey, I do have situational awareness when I'm actually nowhere near approaching that.
Yeah, and here's the scary thing, guys, even for new people coming into the system, and they're coming into a system where the culture is already in play. They're being introduced to a culture that's very complacent, but in their mind, this is effectiveness because they don't know any better. And it's sad, but the person that is trying to do the right thing among the senior staff, the person that's documenting the concerns, like in this case, maybe the doors or the lack of staff and the lack of resources, they become a nuisance. Because everybody else seems to be trucking along. And now here you go, this person waking things up and making it a concern. And it's like, well, it is a concern. So I think when it comes to addressing systematic complacency, you have to go at first leadership down to let people know that we expect us as a team to address it and not fall back. But you also got to have peer-to-peer accountability. So peer-to-peer accountability is probably going to be the first level of accountability, and then the final level will be obviously your supervisors on up. But your peer-to-peer accountability matters, which means like if I'm doing something wrong, Russ comes behind me, addresses me. I don't see Russ as a nuisance. I don't see Russ as trying to wake up a sleeping dragon. I see Russ as keeping me mindful. Again, when you have a facility that's quiet and everything else is kind of heading in the wrong direction, you need that wake-up call before it fully goes into that wrong direction. So I think this, to me, is extremely important, because I think this is the reason why when you do a reset of a facility, I mean, if you got to take out some of those inmates, if the state could pick up some, let's get the maintenance done. Let's reset this facility. Let's lock it down if there are some areas where the inmates can safely be housed, and let's try to go back and see if I can take this escape now, if possible, and utilize it to an extreme lesson for staff to realize the dangers of complacency. But one of the things that I would be curious of is, how did we get it this far? I mean, for me as a leader, I try to keep in touch with things that are happening at other facilities, because I know at any moment it can happen at my facility. So is there a level of not understanding that, hey, this may not have happened at your facility, but it could? I mean, maybe our leadership has to be humbled. Maybe our leadership buys into the fact that we think we're running perfection, but we're not. And then eventually it will get exposed. I mean, if you're a leader and you're watching something and the first thing you say is, that will never happen at my facility because it never has happened, well, maybe you're not in a position to be leading, because that's the type of mindset that leads into complacency. And if you have that at the top, it's going to travel down, because the same people on the floor are going to say, well, I don't need to do my tours because nothing happened last night. It won't happen tonight. Or I know this door is broken, but you know what? I trust the inmates. They're looking for a good night's sleep. They're not going to open up that door tonight and try to do anything foolish. Why would they? They didn't do it last night. They didn't do it the day before. And escapes that happen in Tennessee, that doesn't happen here in New Orleans. I mean, no, you got to actively keep that mindset right. And that starts with the top. And one last thing, when it comes to complacency, it's a culture that gets allowed through time that eventually destroys everything that we're about. And you'll never know what area it's attacking until it does. That's the scariest thing. You won't realize you have systematic concerns until it blows up in your face. And what should have been preventive measures, because they weren't being done, are going to be the reactive measures and a reminder of what you should have been doing. Now we got 3 more areas left for us. We got the restoring community and stakeholder confidence. So in New Orleans, public confidence was shaken due to delayed communication and the severity of the escape, necessitating transparent engagement with stakeholders to rebuild trust. You got to engage victims, the public, and partner agencies, show that change is happening and trust is being rebuilt. And then again, the lack of communication and coordinated action undermine public faith, not just in the jail, but in the justice system as a whole. So what role do victims, the public, and partner agencies play in rebuilding trust, and how should corrections leaders engage them?
So, I think that we've addressed some of this. I really like to, look at it, though, from the perspective of the victims. And I think that this is something that a third party would be likely to ask, but might not happen, if they only do a local review. But the one thing I would be asking, if I were there conducting this review, would be, how early on were the victims of these individuals contacted? Did they just let the media, kind of let it out there, and that was their method of contact? Or did the instant that they were, trying to reapprehend these individuals, had they already come up with that victims list? Did they already send manpower out there to make the notifications and to try and see if they stood a chance at, perhaps reapprehending an individual? I really want to know, because I think that that's a huge gap in this. If they didn't at least immediately, try and make contact with those victims. One of the things I've talked about before was the difference between being a victim at work, where I've been attacked more than a few times, and being a victim outside in as average Joe citizen. And they have a responsibility to those victims. I've had to register as a victim before in a case. And, that was kind of the thing is, they told me when the guy was going to parole or in this case, be sent back to probation and all of those things. So that is, and so that, I guess that's the one thing I want to focus on in this, because we kind of talked a little bit about the rest of it.
Yeah, and guys, when an inmate's prepared to be released, the prosecutors notify months ahead of time so they could let the families know, just in case there are any adjustments. When you do have a sudden escape, there is no preparation. So that's another area that is a great concern, because now if something happens, like you saw in Texas a few years back, that adds to the weight of the whole circumstances of the escape. So in this case here, 10 people. That multiplies that. And these are not the most friendliest inmates. These are some violent individuals who are still dealing with their cases. God knows if they're going to go after some of their witnesses. I mean, it adds to the consequences, the potential weight that is going to be carried because of this escape. So again, we did touch on this, but it is about transparency, letting people know of the effort. And the last thing you want is to hold them from that transparency, because if I was a victim, I have the right to know, and they're going to see it that way. I need to know. I'm part of the public. I want to know because it's affecting me. So that I know sometimes there's got to be stuff that you may not be able to share, especially getting close to finding who these individuals where they could be. But in the meantime, you got to be transparent with a lot of those efforts, because the public, it demands it, and rightfully so. Okay, so two last parts. This is a part that's never really discussed. I wanted to touch on it a little bit, but I do have people from the outside that look in that do have loved ones in the facility. So I want to talk about the inmate population. So in New Orleans, the escape led to increased security measures affecting the broader inmate population and potentially escalating tension within the facility. So you got to manage lockdown tension, stop rumors, and ensure inmates see real consequences without losing control. You want post-incident lockdowns are necessary, but can inflame stress and resentment if not communicated clearly and applied fairly. And we kind of talked about pressure from the public or the loved ones to let their loved ones out of those cells. I don't think that should be rushed at this point, because there's a lot of stuff that have to be understood, including how did this happen? That's the big key. I can't open up a door if I don't know what actually happened, because I don't want this incident to happen again. And then, Russ, how do you manage inmate tension and narratives after an escape without creating further disruption or resentment?
Inmates are really good at playing the victim no matter what happens. I think that we, set up a lot of expectations for them to, always, program is always going to run. And when we don't sensitize them, and this is my opinion now, when we don't sensitize them to the fact that, hey, program can be shut down at any time. Sometimes we have to do these things, and they start to take on that expectation that, hey, there's no reason to shut down program whatsoever. And it's my civil rights and stuff. And we put them into a position where they become very chesty whenever that's questioned. That's why I think that's a wrong approach. I think inmates should be sensitized to losing, program as often as possible, not to negatively impact the program, but to condition them to the fact that these things do occur. So that's one facet of it. The second thing that I would do if I were there running the jail is, I would really strive to communicate with the inmates an expectation as to how long we think it might last. And you have to be careful with that, because they'll always say, well, you said that it was only, and no matter how many qualifiers you put on it, they will pretend like you never put any qualifiers on it. But nonetheless, I would engage with that. I would try and tell them, hey, this is how long that we expect. Program's going to be impacted for X amount of days. It could go further, and then I would make sure that they knew that there was an expectation that we are going to return to a normal program. As soon as practically possible, and with their safety involved. I would also, if it's warranted and if it doesn't, unnecessarily impinge on other safety issues, if they have tablets or something, if we can get those out to them so they can contact their families or have something to babysit them, they can play Tetris or whatever. That would be a great idea. Give them, something to focus on other than the moment at hand. I would do that. And then the third thing that I would do is I would be looking to farm information, from those contacts with the outside world and so forth, and try and see what I can develop as far as intelligence sources or bits of information, because there may be something that happens within that category that may allow us to reapprehend one of those individuals out there. I'm always very practical about reasons why I give inmates a chance to make contact with the outside world, as it were. So I think that those three things are the most important to take into consideration.
Yeah, guys, when you open up a prison, open it back up, you have to be strategic. So you have to really identify what happened the first go around, and then ensure that we don't make those same mistakes again. So there'll be some people in the public that are going to want that figured out before you reopen, and there's some that are going to want you to open up right away. It just depends on where their perspective is, but you can't get pushed by either one of those pressures. You're going to have to make a decision. So one side may want you to keep on delaying, and the other side wants it now. And somewhere in the middle is where it is most practical. It's you understanding your facility, knowing what happened, and knowing how to strategically open up the facility, not all at once, but strategically. And I will say this too, you also got to remember the emotional toll it has on the facility. This is the key. When you discern what the issues are based on the infrastructure, and you do try to address it, remember, you got to get staff on board. Are they emotionally ready for this opening? Because I know there was a major consequence here, but I just want to be fair. Staff is hit with a big failure, and they have to take that in, and now we have to rebuild their confidence. And a lot of people may not want to hear that, but this is true. These people have to go back to work. They have to be effective. They have to do their job. And the last thing you want for them to do is go back to their job and believe that they are a failure at doing it. Because I'll guarantee the inmates are going to go back and forth with that. They're going to play games with staff. They're going to know that staff's confidence was shaken a bit. So we got to get some retraining. I get that, but it's got to be an effort to rebuild their confidence as well. Let's not underestimate the importance of confidence in doing the job. This facility was hit hard. So we got to do what we can to make sure that the staff is ready to handle that responsibility again, that they're going to bounce forward. And I know, as I said, I know a lot of people want to push blame, but once the smoke clears, these people are going to have to go back to work. So how do we make sure that they're ready to do that? Okay, and the last part I got here, Russ, unless you have anything about that, Russ, you have anything with that building confidence again?
No, I think I covered what I have.
All right, so I got the last part. It's moving forward. So in New Orleans, Sheriff Susan Hudson has called for significant funding to address systematic issues, emphasizing the need for long-term reform to prevent future incidences. Real quick before I go on, these should have been preventive measures. Now they're reactive measures. So it's sad when they come out after the fact. It's like, well, why wasn't this being done beforehand? So it's a shame when preventive measures become reactive measures. So you want to make real change, involve staff, and commit to long-term consistency. Trust isn't won back overnight. The escape has spurred calls for lasting reforms, not just quick fixes. However, the public remains skeptical, and staff need to see consistent follow-through. Hey, Russ, what does rebuilding trust look like over time, and how do we make sure the lessons from the escape lead to lasting change?
Yeah, that's the really big question, isn't it? That's the thing that we're going to have to hope that whoever's running this, and it's not you and me, find a way to get there. I think that we've well outlined what those things need to be. I think that there's always room for better training. I think that there's always room for better better retention. Better what's the word I'm looking for? Better hiring practices. Seeking out the best that you can possibly afford to get there. Recruitment. That's what I mean. Right there. Those things all together are always going to impact the facility and the department in ways that you really can't even see or define, and are going to hopefully stop these things from ever happening, so that it becomes really unapparent that anything better has really come along. That's really where we want to be. Is we want to be at the top of the game, so that this kind of thing seems like it never could happen. Not as complacency, but as the fact that hey, this department is very professional. This department spends good money on training. This department recruits great candidates. This department really works to retain good solid professionals that they've brought up through the ranks. And this department is really transparent. This department does this, that, and the other thing. And when you're hitting on all cylinders, this kind of thing becomes less likely to have a chance of fomenting, of happening. And then in the end, it becomes something that this could have been avoided, but they've missed a lot along the way. The systemic failures, a lot of them are not even going to be brought up because they don't ever appear. They're below the horizon and they can't be seen, and people tend not to pay attention to those things. So I think there's a lot to be said. I think that I hope this particular jail gets its act together. I hope they hire a really good independent third party. I hope that independent third party really goes in there and tears things apart and does their job in helping that entity, that organization, rebuild and reestablish that trust. So, but all of that remains to be seen. At this point, from what I've seen so far, I wouldn't be hopeful. But then again, you never know who's going to rise to the occasion.
Hey, guys, and this also takes time. I do believe that there is a need for a reset, basically an understanding of what's needed, and then basically rebuild. Because, again, when you fail at such a basic level, you need to reset, because we need to trust you from that basic level and move forward from there. So I think it takes time. It's not something that is done overnight. And I really do think it really deals with, building confidence also back with your people, because you could do the vanity side and just go ahead and build trust out with the public and make all these promises and promises and promises. But if you're not doing the same to the people that got to do the job on the inside every day, if you're not doing what you can for them to help build their confidence, help them rebuild, then you're really just going to have something that's surface, but nothing that has any meat in it. So in the end, if you want to rebuild trust, I think rebuilding trust starts from the inside out. I really do. I think that when you want to rebuild trust, you got to make sure that the people are ready to do the job again, especially after this, because they are being judged. For a fact they are not proud of what they do in the moment because of that consequence. So that they're probably getting judged, ripped, so you need to make sure that they stand tall and they're ready to get back into it again. And that's great, because if you rebuild the public perspective, you rebuild trust, that will help feed, but it starts from us first, and then that will reinforce it. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I think we've covered this very well. I would just say, if you're involved out there, if you're at some jail, besides this one, if you're working at some prison, whatever type of custodial facility that you might be at, the time to step forward is before something bad happens. I really run these words all the time. Observe and respond is not a model that we want to be involved with. We want to be proactive. We want to be preemptive. We want to get ahead of things before they have a chance to occur. And so, critical thinking and being proactive versus reactive is really where it's at, people. Get on board with that. Start doing everything that you can to make that the reality of your facility. I used to tell my kids, I've even told, cadets and trainees and all kinds of stuff this before. Don't learn from your own mistakes. Learn from the mistakes of other people, and you'll really thank me for that.
Yeah, that's true, man. And guys, my closing remark, guys, is again, you got to rebuild. Eventually that facility is going to have to become operational, or sadly can get closed down. Those inmates can get absorbed across other counties. But with that said, this is not an easy thing. It's something that is going to take years to do. It's a major thing that happened. It's not the escape of one, it's the escape of 10. So you definitely have systematic failures that have to be addressed at the highest level. But I think trust starts with accountability and transparency. I take ownership of what happened as this leader of this facility, and this is the steps we're doing moving forward, because this is what we discovered went wrong. And I think that's the effort. And I think the public, through time, will start to forgive what has happened, but it won't be right away. And it's a struggle, but I think it does happen over time. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.